The terrified teacher backed away as a group of aggressive teenagers cornered her disabled students in the park. The children were completely defenseless, and the bullies thought they had found easy targets. But they made a terrible mistake. They did not notice the tall man stepping silently onto the grass right behind them. Spencer was a highly trained Navy SEAL. Beside him stood a massive German Shepherd, ready to defend the innocent. When a group of cowardly thugs crosses paths with an elite soldier and his fiercely loyal dog, the situation changes instantly. What happens when a true protector steps out of the shadows? Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. And if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The morning sun filtered through the canopy of Central Park. Stella, a young woman, laid a large checkered picnic blanket on the grass. She wore a white sundress, and her brown hair was tied back in a ponytail. This was a contrast to the designer gowns her wealthy family expected her to wear. Despite her father Richard being a prominent billionaire, Stella had walked away from the corporate world to follow her calling as a special education teacher. Today, she was chaperoning 5 of her students on a field trip. These children faced physical and developmental challenges. Little Tommy sat in his specialized wheelchair watching a flock of pigeons. Sarah, a girl who relied on forearm crutches, was trying to organize the paper plates. Stella handed out sandwiches and juice boxes with a smile. "Tommy, would you like apple juice or grape juice today?" Stella asked, holding up 2 colorful boxes. "Apple, please," Tommy replied, reaching out with trembling hands. "Here you go. Sarah, can you pass these napkins to Leo?" Stella directed the children, keeping them engaged in the activity. Leo was a quiet boy who rarely spoke, but he smiled as Sarah handed him the napkins. Stella watched them interact, feeling a sense of accomplishment. She had spent months teaching them how to share and communicate with each other. This picnic was a reward for their hard work all semester. She took a bite of her own sandwich, enjoying the warm breeze. She loved these kids and dedicated her energy to making sure they felt included. The children laughed and enjoyed the fresh air, grateful for the escape from their classroom routine. The morning was peaceful, filled only with the sounds of rustling leaves. That atmosphere shattered when a group of 4 older teenagers approached the picnic area. They wore dark clothing and carried an air of hostility. The tallest of the group kicked a plastic bottle at Tommy's wheelchair. The sudden noise caused the boy to flinch and drop his sandwich. "Look at this pathetic little club," the leader sneered, kicking dirt onto the edge of the blanket. "You guys lost or something?" Stella stood up and stepped between her students and the group. "We are just having our lunch. Please move along and leave us alone." She kept her voice steady. The teenagers laughed at her request. They began to circle the blanket, mocking the children with cruel comments. "Or what?" another teenager asked, stepping closer to Sarah. "What are you going to do, hit us with your little sticks?" He pointed at her crutches. Sarah whimpered and hid her face behind her hands. "Hey, look at the kid in the chair," the third teenager laughed. "Think he needs a push down the hill?" Stella felt a knot of fear in her stomach. "Stop it," Stella demanded. Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "You need to leave right now, or I am calling the police." She pulled her mobile phone from her pocket. "I don't think so," the leader said. He lunged forward and swatted it from her hand. The device tumbled through the air and landed in the dirt. "Nobody's calling anyone. We are just having some fun." The teenager took a step toward Stella, invading her personal space. "Step away from them right now." The voice was deep and commanding. Everyone turned to see a tall, muscular man approaching from the paved path. This was Spencer, an active-duty Navy SEAL on leave from his overseas deployments. He wore tactical cargo pants and a black T-shirt that highlighted his broad shoulders. His posture was straight, and his dark eyes held a steely focus. Walking in step beside his left leg was his loyal companion, a massive German Shepherd. The dog possessed a black and tan coat, alert ears, and intelligent brown eyes that locked onto the group of teenagers. The German Shepherd did not bark or pull on its leash. Its silent presence was intimidating. Spencer stopped a few feet away from the group. The leader turned around, annoyed by the interruption. "Mind your own business, man. This has nothing to do with you." Spencer did not raise his voice. He radiated a calculated calm that dropped the temperature of the confrontation. "I am making it my business. You have exactly 5 seconds to turn around and walk away from this woman and these children." The teenagers hesitated, their bravado faltering under Spencer's gaze. "Are you threatening me?" the leader asked, puffing his chest and taking a step toward Spencer. Spencer did not blink. "I am giving you a choice. Make the right one." He gave a subtle hand signal to his left. The German Shepherd stepped forward and placed its body directly between Stella and the teenagers, acting as a shield. The dog let out a low rumble from deep within its chest. It was a clear warning that no further aggression would be tolerated. The teenager who had knocked away Stella's phone realized the mistake they had made. They were not dealing with an ordinary civilian, but a highly trained military operative and a working dog ready to defend its handler. Panic replaced their smirks. The teenagers backed away slowly, raising their hands in surrender. Without another word, they turned and sprinted away across the grass, looking over their shoulders until they disappeared behind a line of oak trees. Spencer stood still, watching their retreat until he was certain the threat was neutralized. Only then did he relax his shoulders as he turned his attention back to the teacher and her students. The park returned to its peaceful state, leaving Stella breathless and the children safe from harm. The teenagers were gone, leaving behind a mess of scattered food and frightened children in the quiet park. Spencer immediately knelt down to help pick up the fallen items from the grass. His movements were efficient and calm, designed to project safety. The German Shepherd stayed close to his side, its sharp eyes scanning the trees before relaxing. The dog seemed to understand the children were scared and needed comfort. It walked over to Tommy and gently rested its large head on the boy's knee. Tommy hesitated for a second, his small hands trembling, before reaching out to pet the soft black and tan fur. The dog let out a happy pant and wagged its tail, encouraging the boy. Sarah watched with wide eyes from behind her crutches. "What is his name?" she asked softly, stepping closer. Spencer looked up from gathering the scattered juice boxes. "His name is Ranger. He is a very good boy." Ranger walked over to Sarah and offered his paw. Sarah giggled and shook it, her fear melting away. Even quiet Leo managed a small smile as Ranger performed a quick spin command when Spencer signaled him. Stella watched the interaction with a deep sense of relief washing over her. The terrifying moment had passed entirely, replaced by the comforting presence of this stranger and his loyal companion. She marveled at how quickly the children responded to the dog, their anxiety replaced by pure joy and fascination. Ranger moved patiently from child to child, allowing them to pet his ears and stroke his back. It was a beautiful display of gentleness from such a powerful animal. Stella finished packing the remaining food into her basket and checked on her students one last time. She stood up and turned to Spencer. "Thank you so much. I really do not know what would have happened if you had not come along when you did. Those kids were actively looking for a fight." Spencer stood up to his full height, towering over her slightly. He brushed the dirt off his tactical pants. "You do not need to thank me. I do not like seeing people get bullied, especially not kids who cannot defend themselves." Stella extended her hand toward him. "I am Stella. These are my students." Spencer shook her hand gently. His grip was firm and warm, a stark contrast to his intimidating appearance. "I am Spencer. I am just back in town on leave for a little while." Stella noticed the way he continuously watched the perimeter of the park, his eyes taking in every detail. He was constantly alert, a habit born from years of training. "You are in the military," she stated confidently. It was not a question. "Navy SEAL," he confirmed quietly. He called Ranger back to his side with a quiet whistle. The dog immediately obeyed, sitting at attention by his left leg. "You have a tough job," Stella said. She guided the children back to their picnic blanket so they could finish eating. "But you seem to have a very soft spot for these little ones." Spencer watched Ranger play a gentle game of fetch with a soft ball that Tommy threw across the grass. "They are the exact reason we do what we do," he replied. "We train to protect the people who cannot protect themselves." The children finally settled down to finish their lunch in peace. Ranger laid right in the center of the group, acting as a watchful guardian over the entire blanket. Stella offered Spencer a spare turkey sandwich, and he accepted it with a polite nod. They sat a few feet away from the children, allowing them space to eat. The afternoon sun warmed the grass and created a peaceful environment. "You must have seen a lot of terrible things in your line of work," Stella said quietly. She did not want to pry into his past, but she was incredibly drawn to his quiet strength. Spencer looked down at his hands resting on his knees. They were scarred and calloused from years of intense labor and combat. "I have seen enough to know that the world desperately needs more people like you. People who actually care about others." Stella felt a warm blush rise to her cheeks. She was used to people in her wealthy social circle dismissing her career choice entirely. Her father always told her she was wasting her potential by working as a teacher instead of joining the family business. "I just want to give them a safe place to learn and grow," she explained softly. "They face so many massive challenges every single day of their lives. The least I can do is make sure they feel valued and important." Spencer nodded slowly, processing her words. He deeply understood that kind of relentless dedication. It mirrored his own lifelong commitment to his country and his teammates. "We definitely have that in common," he said, looking at her with a newfound respect. Spencer took a bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully before speaking again. "I joined the military because of my younger brother." Stella turned her full attention to him, completely captivated by his story. "He was born with a severe heart defect. He was very small and weak. People picked on him constantly when we were growing up. I spent my whole childhood fighting off bullies and defending him." Spencer paused, and his dark eyes grew distant with memory. "He passed away when he was 12 years old. After that happened, I realized I could not protect him anymore, but I could protect others. That is why I became a SEAL, to stand firmly between the innocent and the people who want to hurt them." Stella felt a heavy lump form in her throat. The raw honesty in his voice was completely unexpected. Underneath his imposing exterior, he carried a deep well of empathy and sorrow. "I am so incredibly sorry about your brother," she whispered. Spencer offered a small, sad smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Thank you. Ranger helps me a lot. He is a retired working dog who saw combat too. We keep each other grounded when things get tough." Stella looked at the large German shepherd, now sleeping peacefully with his head near Tommy's wheelchair. She realized that Spencer and Ranger were two halves of the same whole. They were both scarred warriors who had found a beautiful purpose in guarding the vulnerable. "You are a very good man, Spencer," Stella said. She meant every single word. Spencer looked directly into her eyes. For the first time since he arrived at the park, his intense gaze softened completely. The connection forming between them was undeniable and swift. It was built solidly on shared values and a mutual understanding of sacrifice. The rest of the afternoon passed in comfortable, easy conversation. They talked about their lives, their quiet hopes, and the simple joy of a peaceful day in the park. When it was time for Stella to take the children back to school, Spencer and Ranger walked them all the way to their waiting bus. He waited patiently until they were safely on board and seated before waving goodbye. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Stella looked back through the window. Spencer was still standing there on the sidewalk, a silent protector bathed in the warm afternoon light. She knew in her heart this would not be the last time she saw him. The weeks following the incident in the park brought Stella and Spencer closer together as they spent their weekends walking through the city with Ranger, drinking coffee, and sharing quiet stories about their lives. Spencer found a sense of peace he had not felt in years, while Stella admired his unwavering integrity and quiet strength, realizing quickly that his calm demeanor was a shelter from the chaotic demands of her wealthy background. As their bond deepened, Stella decided it was time to introduce Spencer to her family, inviting him to a formal dinner at her childhood home, a sprawling estate located on the wealthy outskirts of the city. Spencer accepted the invitation without hesitation, though he knew the evening would be a stark departure from their usual casual outings and a true test of their developing relationship. He dressed in his best civilian clothes, a crisp blue button-down shirt and pressed dark trousers, presenting a simple, clean, and practical appearance that suited his disciplined nature. He drove his older model truck up the winding, tree-lined driveway of the estate as dark clouds gathered overhead, hinting at an approaching storm that matched the tension building in his chest. The mansion loomed ahead, a massive structure of stone and glass that looked more like a museum than a home, with expensive luxury cars parked neatly near the grand entrance. Spencer parked his truck, checked Ranger's leash, and walked up the wide marble steps where a butler in a tailored uniform opened the heavy oak doors before Spencer even had a chance to knock. The contrast between the rugged soldier and his opulent surroundings was immediate and striking. Yet Spencer carried himself with the same confident posture he would use on a battlefield. Inside, the foyer featured a towering crystal chandelier and floors polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the dimming light from the stormy sky outside. Stella waited at the bottom of a sweeping curved staircase, wearing an elegant black evening gown, looking every bit the heiress she was born to be, but her face brightened with genuine joy when she saw him. She hurried over to greet them, giving Ranger a gentle pat on the head before taking Spencer's arm and leading him into the formal dining room. The room was a cavernous space dominated by a long mahogany table set with fine china, crystal glasses, and heavy silver cutlery, designed to intimidate anyone unaccustomed to such luxury. At the far end of the table sat Richard, Stella's father, an older man in his late 60s with silver hair and sharp, calculating eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Richard wore a custom-tailored suit that projected authority and immense wealth, and he did not stand when Spencer entered the room. His cold gaze swept over Spencer's simple clothes and then settled on the large German shepherd sitting obediently at Spencer's side, causing Richard to frown slightly before gesturing rigidly for them to sit. The dinner commenced with a stiff, uncomfortable silence, broken only by the sound of silverware against porcelain and the low rumble of thunder outside. Servants moved silently around the room, pouring expensive wine and serving course after course of intricate dishes from delicate seafood appetizers to rich, heavy meats. Spencer maintained his composure perfectly, eating quietly, keeping his posture straight, and navigating the complex table setting with a natural discipline that seemed to secretly frustrate Richard, who likely expected the soldier to stumble. Richard finally broke the heavy silence, his voice cold and commanding as he launched into an interrogation, asking Spencer a series of pointed questions about his background, his education, and his long-term career plans in the military. Spencer answered honestly and respectfully, without an ounce of shame, speaking clearly about his demanding deployments, the rigorous training, and his absolute dedication to protecting his team and his country. Richard listened with an expression of polite boredom, taking a slow sip of his wine and setting the crystal glass down with a sharp, echoing click. "Being a soldier is a noble pursuit for a young man," Richard said, his tone dripping with heavy condescension. "But it is hardly a sustainable career for someone looking to build a serious future. It offers no financial stability, no real influence in the circles that matter, and frankly, no place in the world my daughter belongs to." Stella stiffened beside Spencer, her face flushing with a mixture of profound embarrassment and rising anger, and she tried to intervene, but Richard raised a strict hand to silence her, keeping his sharp eyes locked entirely on Spencer. "My daughter has a habit of picking up strays," Richard continued, his words sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet room like a knife. "She works at that school, trying to save children who cannot be saved, and now she brings home a soldier with zero financial prospects. I have spent my entire life building an empire, Spencer, and I expect the man who stands beside my daughter to be an equal, a partner who can contribute to our legacy, not someone who will drain her resources and drag her down into a life of mediocrity." The heavy insult hung in the silent room as the storm outside finally broke, rain lashing against the tall glass windows. Stella looked at Spencer, her eyes pleading with him to stay calm, terrified that her father had pushed him too far. Spencer did not react with anger, he did not raise his voice, and he did not break eye contact with the billionaire sitting across from him. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, placed it neatly beside his plate, and leaned forward slightly, resting his scarred hands on the polished mahogany table, while Ranger let out a soft whine but remained perfectly still at his feet. "With all due respect, sir, we measure success very differently," Spencer said, his voice steady and calm, echoing clearly with unwavering conviction. "You measure a man by his bank account, his properties, and his influence in boardrooms. I measure a man by his word, his loyalty, and his willingness to stand up for the people around him when things get dangerous. I do not have a fortune to offer Stella, but I have honor and I have a clear conscience, knowing I protect the freedoms that allow men like you to build your empires in peace." Richard narrowed his eyes, clearly unaccustomed to being spoken to with such quiet, immovable defiance, and he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms tightly across his chest. "Honor does not pay the bills, son, and it does not secure a comfortable future," Richard scoffed, shaking his head. "You are completely out of your depth here, so I suggest you enjoy the rest of this expensive meal and then walk out those doors forever. Do not mistake my daughter's charity for genuine affection, because you do not belong here, and you never will." Stella stood up abruptly from her chair, the wood scraping loudly against the polished floor, unable to tolerate her father's cruelty for another second. She grabbed Spencer's hand tightly and pulled him gently toward the door, declaring firmly that they were leaving immediately. Spencer stood up gracefully, giving Richard one last measured look of pity rather than anger, refusing to offer an angry retort or a dramatic exit. He simply turned and walked out of the grand dining room with Stella by his side, his loyal dog following closely behind, leaving the wealthy man alone with his cold empire. As the heavy front doors closed behind them, shielding them from the toxic atmosphere of the house, they stepped out into the pouring rain, but Spencer's grip on Stella's hand remained firm and incredibly reassuring. The morning after the disastrous dinner party began, with heavy rain washing over the city streets. Spencer sat at his small kitchen table with a hot cup of black coffee. Ranger lay quietly at his feet. The large German shepherd watched him with intelligent brown eyes. Spencer's phone vibrated loudly on the table. He picked it up and saw an unknown number flashing on the bright screen. He answered with his usual brisk tone. "Hello," Spencer said. A smooth voice on the other end replied quickly. "Mr. Spencer, I am David, an executive assistant to Richard. I am a tall man with glasses, and I handle all of Richard's private affairs. Richard requests a private meeting at his downtown corporate office immediately." Spencer knew this was a tactical move designed to catch him off guard. "I will be there in 30 minutes, Spencer replied. He finished his coffee and grabbed his dark weatherproof jacket. He decided to leave Ranger at the apartment to avoid any unnecessary tension at the corporate tower. He gave the dog a quick pat on the head and locked the door behind him. While Spencer drove his truck downtown through the heavy traffic, Stella faced her own massive crisis across the city. She arrived at the community center where her special education school operated. A formal legal notice was taped securely to the front glass door. Stella felt a cold sense of dread pool in her stomach. She tore the paper down and read the harsh legal print. The building landlord was demanding immediate payment of back rent. If she could not produce a massive sum of money by the end of the week, the school would be permanently evicted. Stella unlocked the door and stepped into the quiet hallway. She looked at the colorful finger paintings on the walls, the specialized equipment she had fought so hard to acquire for her students, and the small wooden desks arranged in a neat circle. Her heart broke at the thought of losing this safe space for Tommy, Sarah, Leo, and the other vulnerable children. This school was her entire life's work. She had poured every ounce of her savings into keeping it running, completely refusing to accept any financial handouts from her wealthy family. She knew her family had the money to save the school instantly. She also knew asking her father for help meant surrendering her independence entirely and moving back into his controlling world. He would use the financial loan to dictate her life choices. She sat at her small desk and buried her face in her trembling hands. The stress was completely overwhelming. She felt the heavy weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She desperately needed someone to talk to. She thought of Spencer and the quiet strength he always provided. Spencer parked his truck in the underground garage of the towering glass skyscraper. He took the private elevator up to the top floor. Topo. The metal doors opened into a massive reception area covered in expensive white marble. David, the executive assistant wearing a sharp gray suit, guided him through double glass doors into Richard's private office. The room was incredibly intimidating. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire sprawling city skyline. Richard sat behind a large desk made of dark polished wood. He did not look up immediately. He continued writing heavily on a document. Spencer stood perfectly still in the center of the room. He relied on his rigorous military discipline to maintain a calm and unreadable exterior. He observed the expensive artwork on the walls and the pristine leather furniture, noting that everything in the room was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Finally, Richard put down his silver pen and looked up. He gestured to a soft leather chair opposite the desk. "Sit down," Richard commanded. Spencer remained standing. "I prefer to stand," Spencer replied calmly. Richard smiled a cold and calculating smile. He opened a secure desk drawer and pulled out a sleek leather folder. He tossed it casually onto the center of the desk. The folder slid and stopped right in front of Spencer. Richard leaned back in his expensive chair and steepled his fingers together. "Open it," Richard said. Spencer slowly opened the folder. Inside was a cashier's check made out to Spencer for a sum of money that most men would never see in their entire lifetimes. The second item was a highly lucrative contract with a premier private security firm operating overseas. "That firm is owned by a close business associate of mine," Richard explained. "The contract guarantees you a high-ranking position, excellent pay, and an immediate departure from the country. You will have a staff of your own, top-tier benefits, and a signing bonus that will set you up for the rest of your life. There is only one single condition attached to this incredibly generous offer. You must walk away from Stella permanently and never contact her again." Richard stated that Spencer was a practical man. A smart soldier knows exactly when to accept a strategic retreat and secure a much better future for himself. Stella is just going through a rebellious phase and needs to be brought back to reality. Take the money and leave. Spencer looked down at the leather folder resting on the polished wood. He did not reach for the check again. He did not even flinch at the massive number written on the visible paper. He looked directly into Richard's sharp eyes. The billionaire fully expected to see hesitation or greed. Instead, he saw only absolute resolve. Spencer spoke with a voice as hard as steel. "I have served alongside brave men who sacrificed their lives for the concept of duty and honor," Spencer said. "My integrity was forged in dangerous places you could never survive. I do not want your money." He closed the folder firmly and pushed it back across the desk. "A soldier's loyalty cannot be bought with a corporate checkbook," Spencer continued. "I care for Stella deeply. I admire her kind heart and her relentless dedication to her students. I will stand by her side no matter what obstacles you throw in our path." Richard's confident smile vanished completely. His face turned red with suppressed anger. "You are making a fatal mistake," Richard warned loudly. "I will crush you. I will make sure you never find stable employment anywhere in the city again." Spencer remained completely unfazed by the corporate threats. "True power does not come from intimidating people with money," Spencer replied. "It comes from having the courage to protect what is right." Spencer turned around and walked calmly toward the heavy glass doors. He did not look back. He left the check and the contract sitting untouched on the large desk. He took the elevator back down to the dark garage. He felt a deep sense of clarity. He knew the war had just begun, but he was fully ready for the fight. He pulled out his mobile phone and called Stella. She answered on the second ring. "Spencer, I need you," Stella said, her voice trembling with unshed tears. Hearing her voice confirmed exactly why he had made his unwavering choice. "I am on my way to the school right now," Spencer promised softly. "Do not worry about anything. We will figure out a solution together." He started his truck engine and drove out of the garage, leaving Richard's toxic world behind to go protect the woman he was quickly falling in love with. The afternoon sun offered no comfort as it shone through the windows of the community center. Stella stood in the middle of the empty classroom holding a stack of legal documents. Mr. Henderson had just left. He was a nervous, middle-aged man with a receding hairline who owned the building. He had practically sweat through his shirt as he handed her the final eviction notice. He explained that a massive corporate holding company had aggressively bought the entire city block that morning. The new owners demanded immediate vacancy for demolition. Mr. Henderson apologized repeatedly, but the money was too much for him to refuse. Stella knew exactly who was pulling the strings behind this sudden corporate acquisition. Her father, Richard, was making good on his threat to destroy her sanctuary. The sheer scale of his cruelty left her breathless. She looked around the room at the brightly colored educational posters and the small wooden desks. The children had gone home for the day. The silence in the building felt heavy and oppressive. She walked over to Tommy's desk and touched the surface. This was the only place where he felt truly safe. This was the only environment where Sarah could walk without fear of being mocked. Richard was willing to crush these vulnerable children just to prove a point and force his daughter back under his control. The realization hit her with physical force. Her knees buckled, and she sank into one of the small chairs. Tears streamed down her face. She pulled her mobile phone from her pocket and stared at Richard's contact name on the screen. She knew what she had to do. She had to call him and surrender. She would agree to move back into the mansion and attend his high society events. She would give up her independence if it meant he would stop the eviction and let the school remain open. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Her vision blurred with tears. She felt entirely defeated. The dark shadow of her father's empire had finally swallowed her light. The front door of the center opened with a familiar squeak. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, accompanied by the lighter clicking of canine paws on the linoleum floor. Spencer stepped into the classroom with Ranger right by his side. He saw Stella sitting in the dark room with her face buried in her hands. He crossed the distance instantly. He knelt beside her chair and pulled her into a tight embrace. Stella dropped her phone and buried her face in his shoulder. She sobbed uncontrollably. Ranger sat close to her legs and rested his chin on her knee, offering his silent comfort. Spencer did not ask what was wrong right away. He just held her firmly, letting her release the overwhelming stress. He stroked her hair and whispered quiet words of reassurance. After a few minutes, Stella pulled back slightly and wiped her eyes. She pointed to the stack of legal papers resting on the nearby desk. She explained everything Mr. Henderson had told her about the sudden buyout and the immediate eviction notice. She told Spencer that she had no other choice but to call her father and give in to his demands. "He won," Stella whispered, her voice cracking with despair. "He has unlimited resources, and he will not stop until he ruins everything I care about. I cannot let these children lose their school because of my stubbornness. I have to go back." Spencer stood up and walked over to the desk. He picked up the heavy stack of legal documents. His expression shifted from comforting to intensely focused. He was a trained Navy SEAL who specialized in tactical analysis and intelligence gathering. He knew how to look for weaknesses in an enemy's defense. He flipped through the thick pages of corporate jargon, reading the fine print with a critical eye. He looked at the names of the holding companies, the dates of the transactions, and the signatures on the bottom lines. Something did not make sense to him. He read through the acquisition summary a second time. Stella watched him carefully. She wiped the remaining tears from her cheeks. "It is useless, Spencer," she said softly. "His lawyers make sure everything is completely airtight." Spencer shook his head slowly. "Your father is a very arrogant man, but he is also a very careful businessman," Spencer said. He pointed to a specific paragraph on the third page. "He threatened me directly this morning. He said he would crush me. But these documents show this holding company started the aggressive buyout process of this block over 3 weeks ago. That was long before you and I even met at the park." Stella frowned in confusion and stood up to look at the paper. Spencer flipped to the final signature page. "This acquisition was not initiated by Richard's primary corporation," Spencer explained, his voice growing sharper. "It is signed by a subsidiary shell company managed by an executive director. The signature belongs to David." Stella recognized the name immediately. David was her father's most trusted executive assistant. He handled all the private affairs and the quiet transactions that Richard wanted kept out of the public eye. Spencer placed the documents back on the desk. His military mind was connecting the scattered pieces of intelligence. "If Richard wanted to punish you today, he would have done it directly and loudly to prove his power," Spencer reasoned. This buyout was planned weeks in advance and executed quietly through an assistant. Someone is moving large amounts of corporate money around using your father's authority, but I do not think your father actually knows about this specific land deal. Stella stared at Spencer as the realization washed over her. "You think David is doing this without my father's permission?" she asked. "I think David is using the corporate funds to buy up real estate for his own profit, and he just happened to target this block because it is a prime location," Spencer replied. "When Richard got angry with you today, David likely saw an opportunity to speed up the eviction and blame it on your father's wrath. It covers his tracks perfectly." Spencer looked at the eviction notice again. His jaw tightened with determination. He turned to Stella and placed his hands on her shoulders. "Do not call your father yet," Spencer told her firmly. "Give me 24 hours to look into this. If I am right, David is embezzling from the company and using this school as collateral damage." Stella felt a tiny spark of hope ignite in her chest. She looked into Spencer's confident eyes and nodded slowly. Ranger let out a small bark of agreement. Spencer knew he was stepping into a dangerous corporate battlefield, but he was fully prepared to fight. He gathered the legal documents and tucked them under his arm. He was going to expose the shadows and protect the woman he loved. The sun dipped below the city skyline and cast long shadows across the crowded streets. Spencer returned to his small apartment with a singular focus. He needed hard evidence to prove David was manipulating the corporate buyout. Ranger followed closely at his heels. The German shepherd sensed the shift in his handler's demeanor, recognizing the quiet intensity that always preceded a mission. Spencer opened his secure military laptop and began tracing the shell company listed on the eviction notice. His years of gathering intelligence in hostile territories made navigating corporate public records seem simple. He followed a digital trail of offshore accounts and dummy corporations. Every single line pointed directly back to David. But digital breadcrumbs were not enough to convince a stubborn man like Richard. Spencer needed physical proof. He needed the original contracts and the hidden financial ledgers. Those documents would only be located inside David's private office at the corporate headquarters. Spencer changed into dark, non-reflective clothing. He looked down at Ranger. "We are going to work tonight," Spencer said quietly. Ranger let out a soft huff and wagged his tail. The dog was fully trained for stealth operations and seemed eager to help. They arrived at the towering glass skyscraper just past midnight. The building was mostly dark. Only a few windows on the lower floors remained illuminated by night shift workers. Spencer avoided the main lobby entirely, knowing it was heavily monitored by advanced camera systems. He guided Ranger to a rear loading dock where the delivery trucks usually parked. He used a specialized electronic bypass tool to unlock the heavy metal service door. They slipped inside undetected. The service corridors were dimly lit and smelled of industrial cleaning supplies. Spencer moved with absolute silence, checking his corners and staying in the shadows. Ranger mirrored his every step, his padded paws making no sound on the concrete floor. They rode the freight elevator up to the executive floor. When the elevator doors opened, Spencer paused and listened. The executive floor was heavily guarded. He could hear the distinct sound of 2 security guards talking casually at a desk down the main hallway. They were blocking the only direct path to David's office. Spencer knelt beside Ranger. He pointed toward a side corridor that led to a massive open-plan workspace. He gave a sharp, silent hand signal. Ranger understood the command instantly. The German Shepherd detached from Spencer's side and vanished into the shadows of the side corridor. A few moments later, a loud crash echoed across the quiet floor. A heavy metal filing cabinet drawer slammed shut, followed by the sound of scattering office supplies. "What was that?" one of the security guards asked, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. The sound of heavy boots hitting the marble floor indicated both guards were moving away from their post to investigate the noise. Ranger let out a low, confusing whimper from the far side of the workspace, drawing the guards further away from the executive suite. Spencer did not waste a single second. He moved swiftly down the now empty main hallway. He reached the heavy oak door with a small gold plaque bearing David's name. The door was secured by a complex electronic keypad. Spencer retrieved a small decryption device from his pocket. He plugged it into the keypad's interface. The device cycled through thousands of numerical combinations in a matter of seconds. The lock clicked open with a quiet beep. Spencer pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it silently behind him. David's office was immaculately organized. The walls were lined with expensive art. The large mahogany desk was completely clear of clutter. Spencer pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and swept the beam across the room. He walked behind the desk and booted up the desktop computer. He inserted a specialized flash drive that bypassed the standard login protocols. While the computer extracted the encrypted files, Spencer turned his attention to a locked physical filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He used a set of tension tools to carefully pick the physical lock. The top drawer slid open smoothly. Spencer began sorting through thick manila folders. He found exactly what he was looking for. There were printed bank statements from offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. There were property deeds for various city blocks, including the exact location of Stella's school. Most importantly, there was a detailed corporate manifesto. The documents proved that David was systematically siphoning millions of dollars from Richard's primary accounts over the past 3 years. David was using the stolen money to purchase prime real estate through his dummy corporations. His ultimate goal was to present a massive portfolio to the board of directors and execute a hostile takeover, effectively forcing Richard out of his own company. The eviction of the school was just a minor, cruel step in David's massive scheme to accumulate profitable land and crush Richard's legacy. Spencer pulled out his phone and took high-resolution photographs of every single document. He made sure the signatures, the account numbers, and the dates were perfectly clear. He placed the folders back exactly as he found them and locked the cabinet, leaving no trace of his search. He returned to the computer. The flash drive had finished copying David's hidden digital ledgers. Spencer removed the drive, shut down the computer, and wiped down the keyboard to ensure he left no physical evidence of his presence. He stood completely still in the dark office and listened. The hallway outside was silent. He opened the door slightly and peered out. The path to the freight elevator was clear. Spencer slipped out of the office and walked quickly down the hall. As he reached the elevator doors, a dark shape emerged from the shadows. Ranger trotted up to his side. The dog looked extremely pleased with himself. He had successfully led the security guards on a wild chase through the cubicles and slipped away without being seen. "Good boy," Spencer whispered, giving the dog a quick scratch behind the ears. They entered the elevator and descended back to the quiet loading dock. They exited the building and walked back to the parked truck. The cold night air felt refreshing after the tense infiltration. Spencer climbed into the driver's seat and looked at the small flash drive resting in his palm. He held the absolute key to destroying David's entire criminal plan. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb. He dialed Stella's number on his phone. She answered immediately, her voice tight with anxiety and sleeplessness. "Did you find anything?" she asked. Spencer smiled a grim, determined smile. "I found everything," Spencer replied. "David is embezzling millions of dollars. He is trying to steal the entire company from your father. The school eviction is just a small cover for his massive real estate grab." Stella let out a loud gasp of shock and relief. "I cannot believe David would betray my family like this," she said. "He has worked for my father for a decade. What do we do now?" "We prepare for a fight," Spencer said calmly. "Your father is holding a major board meeting tomorrow afternoon. That is where David plans to finalize his power grab. We are going to walk right into that meeting and show everyone exactly who he is." Spencer hung up the phone. He looked over at Ranger sitting proudly in the passenger seat. The battle lines were drawn. The hard evidence was fully secured. The traitor was finally exposed. Spencer drove through the quiet city streets, completely ready to finish the mission, protect the innocent children, and fight for the woman he loved. The afternoon sun glared against the glass walls of the top-floor boardroom at Wilton Industries. Richard sat at the head of a massive mahogany table. He wore a sharp black suit and a red tie. The room was filled with 12 board members. They were wealthy men and women in expensive business attire, clutching leather portfolios and waiting for the proceedings to begin. David stood near the front projection screen. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit and a confident smile. He was a tall man with glasses who looked entirely in control of the situation. Richard cleared his throat to bring the room to order. He held a silver pen in his right hand. A thick stack of legal documents rested directly in front of him. These documents would officially transfer operational control of several major subsidiaries to David. Richard believed this was a highly strategic move to secure the company's financial future. He had absolute faith in his assistant. He had no idea he was on the verge of signing away his vast empire to a traitor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice projecting easily across the quiet room. "Today marks a significant transition for this prestigious company. I am placing immense trust in David to lead our new real estate ventures moving forward." The board members nodded in mutual agreement. David stepped forward with a humble expression that masked his true intentions. "Thank you for this incredible opportunity, sir," David said smoothly. "I will ensure this company reaches unprecedented levels of profitability and market dominance." Richard nodded approvingly. He lowered his silver pen to the signature line. The ink tip touched the crisp paper. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open with a loud, violent crash. The thick wooden panels hit the walls with a sharp crack. Everyone jumped and turned toward the entrance in alarm. Spencer stood squarely in the doorway. He wore his crisp blue button-down shirt and dark trousers. His posture was rigid and uncompromising. Ranger stood faithfully at his left side. The large German shepherd scanned the room with sharp brown eyes, immediately assessing the environment for threats. Stella stood right behind Spencer. She wore a simple gray dress, and her face was pale but deeply determined. Richard dropped his pen and stood up quickly. His face turned red with instant fury at the unexpected intrusion. "What is the exact meaning of this?" Richard demanded loudly. "Guards, remove this man immediately before I have him arrested." Two large security guards stepped forward from the back of the room. They wore standard gray uniforms and carried heavy tactical batons on their belts. David's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second when he saw Spencer. He quickly regained his composure and pointed at the door. "You heard the chairman," David ordered the guards sharply. "Get them out of this building right now." Spencer did not take a single step backward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small digital flash drive. He held it up high for the entire room to clearly see. "I highly suggest you tell your guards to stand down," Spencer said calmly. His voice easily cut through the rising panic in the room. "Unless you want them to be willing accessories to massive corporate fraud and embezzlement." The two guards completely ignored his verbal warning. They rushed forward to grab Spencer by the shoulders and physically force him out into the hallway. Spencer moved with blinding military speed. He sidestepped the first guard's clumsy reach and delivered a sharp palm strike to the man's chest. The guard stumbled backward heavily and fell hard onto the thick carpet, gasping for air. The second guard raised his baton to strike. Spencer gave a short, sharp whistle. Ranger launched forward like a guided missile. The German Shepherd did not bite or show excessive aggression. He hit the second guard squarely in the chest with his strong front paws. The sheer force of the large working dog knocked the air out of the man instantly. The guard crashed to the floor with a loud thud. Ranger stood directly over him and let out a deep, rumbling growl from his chest. The dog showed his white teeth in a clear warning. The message was perfectly understood. The guard froze completely and dropped his weapon. The entire boardroom erupted in panicked shouts and confused murmurs. Board members scrambled out of their expensive leather chairs to get away from the brief scuffle. "Silence!" Spencer commanded with absolute authority. The room instantly fell quiet. People stared in utter shock at the lone soldier and his highly trained dog who had just neutralized corporate security in seconds. Richard pointed a shaking finger at Spencer across the long table. "You are completely insane," Richard yelled. "I will personally make sure you are locked away in a federal prison for the rest of your life for this stunt." Stella stepped out from behind Spencer's protective shadow. She walked straight toward her angry father. "Listen to him, Dad," Stella pleaded firmly, looking directly into his eyes. "He is trying to save your company from being stolen. He is trying to save everything you spent your life building." David pointed desperately at the open door. "This is a pathetic stunt orchestrated by a disgruntled boyfriend," David yelled, panic finally leaking into his usually smooth voice. "Call the police right now and have them thrown out." Spencer ignored David completely. He walked calmly to the front of the room, bypassing the fallen security guards who were too afraid to move. Ranger stayed in his defensive position, keeping the room entirely secure. Spencer plugged the flash drive directly into the main presentation computer on the desk. He tapped a few keys with practiced efficiency. The large projection screen behind David flickered to life immediately. High-resolution photographs of banking records appeared on the bright screen for everyone to read. "This is David's private financial ledger," Spencer announced clearly to the stunned audience. "It details over $30 million systematically funneled out of your primary holding accounts into offshore Cayman Island banks over the last 3 years." The board members gasped loudly. Richard stared at the screen in absolute disbelief as he recognized the account numbers. Spencer clicked a button to show the next slide. It displayed the property deed for Stella's school and several other local buildings. "He used your stolen money to buy prime real estate under secret dummy corporations," Spencer continued. "He ordered the cruel eviction of Stella's school yesterday, using your name as a convenient cover. His final plan was to use these acquired properties to launch a hostile takeover today and remove you from the board entirely." Richard turned slowly to look at David. The billionaire's sharp eyes narrowed into slits of pure rage. David took a step backward toward the wall. Sweat formed heavily on his forehead. "These documents are entirely fabricated," David stammered weakly. "He is a liar. He hacked my computer and planted those files to frame me." Spencer reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He tossed it heavily onto the mahogany table. "Those are the original physical documents," Spencer said. "I took them directly from your locked cabinet last night. They match the digital records perfectly. The local police are waiting in the lobby right now. I sent them a full copy of everything an hour ago." The remaining color completely drained from David's face. He looked at the hard evidence scattered across the polished table. He looked at the angry, accusing faces of the wealthy board members who realized they had almost been scammed. He looked at the massive German shepherd guarding the only exit. There was absolutely nowhere to run. The boardroom doors opened wider. 4 uniformed police officers walked briskly into the room. They carried metal handcuffs and looked directly at the assistant. "David," the lead officer said loudly, "you are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, fraud, and theft." David did not try to fight back or argue. He slumped his shoulders in total defeat, knowing his intricate plan was entirely ruined. The officers secured his hands behind his back and led him quickly out of the room. The silence left behind was incredibly heavy. Richard sank slowly back into his large chair. He looked much older and incredibly tired. He stared blankly at the documents on the table. He had almost handed his entire legacy to a thief because he trusted the wrong person. He looked up at Spencer. The soldier stood quietly near the presentation screen. He did not look triumphant or arrogant. He just looked relieved that the truth was finally exposed. Richard realized in that quiet moment how drastically he had misjudged this brave man. He had valued wealth and corporate status far above true character and unyielding loyalty. That terrible mistake had almost cost him everything he loved. Stella walked over to her father. She placed a gentle, forgiving hand on his shoulder. "It is over now," she said softly. Richard looked at his brave daughter, then at the soldier who had risked his own freedom to protect their family. The dark storm was finally passing, leaving behind a hard truth and a fresh chance to rebuild their fractured relationship. The morning sun rose over the city skyline, casting bright golden light across the busy streets and reflecting off the towering glass skyscrapers. The heavy storm of the previous days had finally passed completely, leaving the air feeling crisp and clean. Inside her small apartment, Stella woke up with a feeling of profound lightness that she had not experienced in weeks. The terrifying threat of eviction was entirely gone. David was sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting a massive trial for his extensive corporate crimes and blatant embezzlement. Her school was finally safe. She got dressed quickly in a comfortable yellow sweater and faded denim jeans, eager to see her beloved students. Spencer was already awake and waiting for her in the small kitchen. He stood near the counter with a fresh cup of black coffee in his hand. Ranger sat obediently by his feet, his tail thumping rhythmically against the wooden floorboards. Spencer looked deeply relaxed, his usually tense military posture softened by the peaceful morning atmosphere. They shared a quiet breakfast together, discussing their plans for the upcoming week, before driving his older model truck toward the community center. The drive across the city felt entirely different today. The looming shadow of her father's massive corporate empire no longer threatened to crush her humble dreams. They arrived at the school and unlocked the heavy front doors. The familiar, comforting smell of colored crayons and floor wax greeted them immediately. Within an hour, the children began to arrive for their morning classes. Little Tommy rolled his specialized wheelchair through the doorway with a bright, enthusiastic smile on his face. Sarah followed closely behind him, navigating the hallway carefully on her purple forearm crutches. Quiet Leo walked beside her, holding his small metal lunchbox tightly in his hands. As soon as the children saw Ranger resting on the rug, their faces lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. The large German shepherd trotted over to greet them happily. He instinctively lowered his massive head to allow Tommy to pet his soft ears. He walked patiently beside Sarah, purposefully adjusting his pace to match her slow, deliberate steps. The classroom quickly filled with bright laughter and happy chatter. Spencer leaned against the wooden doorframe, watching the beautiful scene with a gentle smile. He had faced countless dangers on hostile battlefields across the world, but this quiet, cheerful classroom was exactly where he wanted to be. Stella stood right beside him, her heart swelling with overwhelming gratitude. She reached out and took his warm hand. His calloused fingers intertwined tightly with hers, offering a silent, unbreakable promise of permanent support. The heavy burden she had carried alone for so long was finally shared, replaced by a profound sense of security and lasting peace. A sleek black luxury car pulled up slowly to the curb outside the modest community center. The powerful engine purred quietly before shutting off completely. The driver quickly opened the rear passenger door. Richard stepped out onto the concrete sidewalk. He did not wear his usual intimidating, custom-tailored boardroom attire. Instead, he wore a simple gray suit without a tie, looking surprisingly ordinary and deeply humbled. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, simply looking at the modest brick building that housed his daughter's entire world. He took a deep, steadying breath and walked purposefully toward the front entrance. Inside the classroom, Spencer heard the approaching footsteps echoing in the hallway long before anyone else noticed. His rigorous military training kept him constantly aware of his surroundings. He turned his head and saw Richard standing quietly in the open doorway. Stella followed his gaze and gasped softly in surprise. She instinctively tightened her secure grip on Spencer's hand. Ranger stopped playing fetch with the children and stood up quickly. The loyal dog walked over to stand directly in front of Stella and Spencer, forming a solid, protective barrier. He did not growl, but his highly alert posture made his protective intentions perfectly clear. Richard stopped at the threshold of the room. He looked at the brightly colored finger paintings covering the plaster walls. He looked at the worn wooden desks arranged in a neat circle. Then his sharp eyes settled directly on the vulnerable children. He saw Tommy laughing loudly in his wheelchair and Sarah resting comfortably on her crutches. For the very first time in his entire life, the wealthy billionaire truly saw the immense value of his daughter's difficult work. It was not a foolish waste of potential, as he had previously claimed in his arrogant ignorance. It was a place of genuine healing, profound kindness, and absolute necessity. Richard slowly walked into the room, keeping his hands visible and completely non-threatening. He stopped a few feet away from Spencer and Stella. He looked directly at the Navy SEAL who had saved his legacy and protected his family. "I came here today because I owe both of you a massive, unconditional apology," Richard began, his voice steady but carrying a heavy weight of sincere regret. "I spent my entire life building a massive financial empire. I foolishly measured a person's worth strictly by their bank accounts and their corporate titles. That twisted perspective blinded me completely. It made me trust a dangerous traitor who smiled in my face while plotting to steal everything I owned. More importantly, it made me push away my own daughter." Richard looked directly at Stella, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I am deeply sorry, Stella. I ridiculed your true passion. I threatened to destroy this safe place just to force you to obey my rules. I was arrogant and incredibly cruel. You chose a noble path of compassion, and I failed to respect that." Stella felt a warm tear slide down her cheek. She had waited years to hear her stubborn father speak with such genuine humility. Richard then turned his attention fully to Spencer. "I insulted you terribly in my home," Richard said clearly to the quiet soldier. "I called you a nobody. I tried to buy your loyalty with a corporate check and send you away forever. But when my company was on the absolute verge of total collapse, you did not walk away. You stepped directly into the line of fire to protect the truth. You showed more honor and integrity in one single night than I have seen in decades of doing ruthless business. You saved my legacy, and you saved my family. I was entirely wrong about you, and I am deeply ashamed of my previous behavior." Spencer listened quietly, his expression calm and unreadable. He did not gloat or demand any further apologies. He simply nodded his head in silent acknowledgment of the older man's truthful words. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He handed it gently to Stella. "I want to actively try and make things right," Richard explained softly. "Inside that envelope is a legal property deed. I officially purchased this entire city block early this morning. I also established a permanent, fully funded endowment in your name. This school will never face eviction again. The foundation has enough capital to completely renovate this building, purchase state-of-the-art medical equipment for the children, and hire a full staff of specialized teachers. You will never have to worry about funding again. This is your building now, Stella. You can run it exactly how you want." Stella opened the envelope with trembling hands. She looked at the legal documents proving his incredible words were true. She looked back up at her father in absolute shock. The children would have the absolute best care possible. The school would expand and help hundreds of other vulnerable families. "Thank you," Stella whispered, her voice choked with heavy emotion. Richard offered a small, hopeful smile. He looked at the large German shepherd standing quietly on the floor. He slowly extended his right hand toward Spencer. It was not a cold corporate handshake to seal a business deal. It was a gesture of deep respect and sincere acceptance from one man to another. "I know I have a lot of hard work to do to earn your trust," Richard said honestly. "But I would be incredibly honored to officially welcome you into our family, Spencer." Spencer looked at the extended hand. He looked at Stella, who was smiling radiantly through her joyful tears. He reached out and firmly shook Richard's hand. "We all start fresh today," Spencer replied simply. Ranger let out a happy, echoing bark, sensing the heavy tension permanently leaving the room. The children cheered loudly at the sudden noise, thinking the dog was initiating a brand-new game. Bright laughter filled the warmly lit classroom. Spencer wrapped his strong arm securely around Stella's waist. She leaned her head against his shoulder happily. They stood together as a united front, watching the children play safely with the loyal dog. The dark corporate shadows were gone forever. A bright new dawn stretched out beautifully before them, built solidly on an unbreakable foundation of unyielding courage, unconditional love, and absolute truth. The story of Spencer, Stella, and the loyal German Shepherd Ranger reminds us that true wealth is not measured by the numbers in a bank account, but by the courage in our hearts. It takes immense bravery to stand up for what is right, especially when the odds are stacked against you. Spencer showed us that honor and integrity will always shine brighter than greed. Stella proved that compassion and dedication to vulnerable children can change the world. Sometimes the greatest protectors do not wear suits or carry briefcases. They wear simple clothes and walk with a loyal dog by their side. I believe that every single one of us has the power to make a positive impact in our communities simply by choosing kindness over cruelty. If this story touched your heart and inspired you to stand up for others, please take a moment to like this video and share it with your friends and family. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful messages of hope and resilience. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on Spencer's bravery, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another inspiring tale. May you always find the strength to do what is right, and may your days be filled with peace and boundless joy.